In management matters, pushback on executive actions. Four top federal contracting trade associations say enough is enough. They want relief from executive orders that create deeper divisions between the commercial and government marketplaces. For more, I'm joined by Stan Soloway, President and CEO of the Professional Services Council. Stan, PSC and three other firms asked the Obama administration for a freeze in presidential directives primarily focused on government contractors. Give us the basics.
Well, Morris, we've had over the last number of years more than a dozen executive orders specifically focused on government contractors. You have to break them into two categories. One set were relatively non-controversial. They were really intended as symbols or messages around issues that the president felt strongly about but couldn't get consensus on in Congress. So, for instance, raising the minimum wage for government contractor employees to $10.10 an hour, which was not a big deal in our community because workers at that level in the government contracting community are largely have their wages dictated by the Department of Labor, and it's very hard to find a wage below $10.10 an hour. So not very controversial. Then you have others, and the granddaddy of them all is called the Fair Pay and Safe Workplace Act, which would, for the first time, create a situation in which all due process goes out the window and you could actually be suspended or debarred from doing government work merely on the basis of an allegation with no objective criteria to measure whether a company is or is not ethical and behaving responsibly. So you have two different categories. But the sum total of all of them, because every one of them requires some degree of investment, new systems, new oversight, new compliance regimes, the sum total is significant added cost, and yet more barriers to being efficient and more barriers to companies that you want to see enter the government market.
Stan, I want to follow up on that. You want the FAR Council and the Labor Department to withdraw proposed guidance on the Fair Pay and Safe Workplaces. Tell us about this executive order and why you oppose it.
Well, the Fair Pay and Safe Workplace order has as its goal a very commendable goal, which is to say if you are a routine offender of federal or a set of state labor laws, we're not going to give you government contracts. So far, so good. But the devil's always in the details. And when you read the proposed executive order and the proposed rules that have come out to implement it, basically what it says is you can be suspended or debarred on a wide array of very vague circumstances, including allegations, not even adjudicated cases. It requires you to set up systems to report to the government on an untold number of state laws, let alone the 14 core federal laws. It is a completely unworkable and unexecutable system in which, as I said earlier, due process has been thrown out the window. And so while the goal is certainly commendable, execution is horrible. And it's a remake, frankly, of a rule that came out of the Clinton administration when I was in the Clinton administration in the late 90s, which was broader than this but had exactly the same goal, which was to keep so-called crooks out of the government contracting space, which we all agreed with. But that executive order, that rule in the 90s, was just as egregious as this one, and was called the blacklisting rule for obvious reasons.
AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka disagrees with you. He calls it a common-sense measure that will make our contracting system fairer. Preventing tax dollars from being funneled to chronic violators of workers' rights is good for workers, our economy, and companies who play by the rules. Trumka makes a compelling argument, Stan. Does that mean groups like PSC who oppose this executive order are against a fair contracting system?
Well, of course not. And actually, I agree with the last about two-thirds of what Rich had to say. It's the front end that I disagree with. Absolutely correct that an ethical marketplace is better for the economy, it's better for the workforce, and so forth. The problem is not the intent of the rule. The problem is the way it is constructed. It is broad, it is sweeping, it is completely subjective, and it creates a situation, as I said, where due process goes entirely out the window. And oh, by the way, it's not even necessary. Companies do get suspended and get debarred for violating labor law and other things, other laws in the process. So I fully agree with Trumka on his conclusion. I just don't agree with the introductory part.
Let's focus on the cumulative effect of these executive orders. By your count, President Obama has issued a dozen of them pertaining to government contracting. You write, while well-intentioned, some of the EOs have required substantial investments in time and systems, even though their actual impact is exceedingly minimal. Some estimate that nearly 30 cents of every contract dollar goes toward compliance with unique government regulations. Give us some context here, Stan. What's the concern with all this compliance?
Compliance is a part of doing work with the government that everybody accepts. But compliance has to be balanced against impact and effect. So it doesn't make any sense to have a hugely onerous compliance system designed to pick up or address a minuscule portion of the system. You want to have a balance in there, and we've lost the balance. So we've seen estimates, as you said, of up to about 30 cents on the dollar of every dollar going to compliance. And the question is, what are we getting in return? So let me take the Fair Pay and Safe Workplace executive order, the big one we just spoke about. That's the most sweeping, it's the most egregious, it's the most expensive. When the White House issued that executive order, when they issued the proposed rules and implementing directions, they said, we expect this is only going to affect a fraction of government contractors. In fact, they said only 25% of government contractors will have to report under the rule, and only a fraction of that 25% will be impacted. Well, if the offending community is so small, why would you address it with this broad, sweeping, one-size-fits-all, rather than focus on the authorities you already have and make them work better?
Point well taken. Stan Soloway, President and CEO of the Professional Services Council. Thanks again, Stan.
My pleasure, Morris.